Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Does anyone have any pecuniary interest to declare? Seeing none, I would like an adoption of the previous minutes. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Mary, seconded by
Mike.
Mike. Sorry, can't see you. That the minutes dated November 26, 2024 of the short-term rental committees be adopted as circulated. Does anyone have any questions on those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? Motion carries, even though I don't see any hands. Must be my internet. Moving on to 4.1. Florence, I'm going to ask a couple of questions here. We have two items for information, then we have two that I'm thinking need comments. Do you want to go through them separately then and see if anyone has any comment on each one? Like, shall we?
What do you mean? Like,
well, for the information, never mind. If I get lost, I'll say Florence, now what? How's that sound?
sounds like a plan.
So item 4.1, we have the report prepared by the clerk. Does anyone have any comments or questions about that report? And if you have a question, several of you are frozen, so just speak up and say, yeah, I have a question or something, okay?
I have a question. It's Mike.
Okay, Mike.
First question, the source for the information about these complaints, was that from the OPP or were those complaints filed through ACW?
Clerk?
I can answer that. Those were complaints that were filed through ACW and that were forwarded to the bylaw enforcement officer for action. So, you know, and that's, yes, that's the size of it.
Okay. My second question is, were they all Lakeshore related?
Clerk?
The majority were, yes.
And my final question is, are you able to summarize kind of what the owner's responses were to those complaints?
The owner's responses to those complaints. Just bear with
Yes.
me a second. I'm just gonna quickly have just a double checker here. Bear with me. I'm working on one screen today. Mike, can you repeat the last question for me?
What the owner's responses were to those complaints, their reactions, comments, were we ignored?
Generally, we are ignored. Most of the time, you know, if we, sorry, I'm losing my screen here. My apologies. I'm just kind of going through them one by one, just as a memory. I don't have that data specifically.
Again, if that's your kind of your recollection, I guess that what that tells us is, because there is no bylaw, there is nothing that has any teeth to it. You know, we tend to be ignored, or at least they're.
So the premise of it is that with most of the time with noise, there's nothing we can do about it. You can talk to the owners or send them a letter and say, hey, just so you know, and they'll say, oh, okay, that's great. But then, you know, their tenants end up causing issues anyway. So.
Yeah. And finally, Madam Chair, just a comment, as far as the number of complaints and the number of properties involved, my first reaction to that was that wasn't a really large number. You know, 15, 16 complaints represented by only 5 properties. I guess the only thing we should be mindful of, and again, if you take a look at the service industry as an example, for every 1 individual that complains, there's probably 10 that don't. So those numbers are, although they are low, they are perhaps misleading as far as how the community is actually feeling about you know, issues that are out involving short-term rentals. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for your comments. And in response to that, I would say that it was a marked increase from the year before. And I think part of that was education. I think there was a certain road that knew to complain. Speaking personally, our registered charities short-term rental that we own and one kilometer down the road, both on Highway 21, both had incidents that were not reported to the ACW, ours because we didn't hear about it for 2 days. And the second one, the police were involved, and both of them involved way more people at the properties than they said were going to be there. And the party just north of ours got way out of hand in fighting and assault charges and all sorts of stuff. And that did not go through the township. And I'm absolutely certain it happened. So I think you're right. We've just started saying, hey, report it if you're having a problem. And part of that is letting people know they can report it. And some of the people are saying, well, reporting it, what are you doing? And we're like, collecting data. It's not a great answer, but it is the answer at this point. Any other comments on that item? Sorry, my screen just went black. Okay, then item number 4.2.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. I think Councillor Hickey had a comment to make.
Yeah, so again, almost everybody is frozen here on my screen. So speak up and
Okay.
We'll do this a little more informally. Go ahead, Evan.
Just a couple questions on clarification. A lot of these are self-explanatory: burning, driving, garbage. Could the clerk have any response to the noise complaints? Are those after a certain time of day, or could a noise complaint come in at, say, 12 noon? I don't know if you have information on that. And then the question about septic. What would the two concerns or complaints about septic be?
To immediately answer the septic one, that is about capacity. So seeing, 25 people show up in a house that has 3 bedrooms.
Okay.
So the concern isn't that the septic has failed. The concern is that it might fail. Those are the complaints that we receive. And as for the first one about noise, it's the noise complaints are always about evening and into the morning. It's always about, they kind of expect it to happen during the day a little bit, but when it's inconvenient and when it's considered, generally excessive is at night.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could just pick up on a comment that the astute Mr. Nicholas made. This is why we have this committee. We're dealing with an isolated number of SDRs that are problematic. I would suggest, as opposed to it being widespread in our municipality, they're isolated instances that tend to not be real receptive to correcting the concerns expressed.
Yeah, Glenn, I would agree with part of that. I would also say that there's a lack of education perhaps on some of the STR owners and a lack of ability to do anything about anything. But yeah, it seems to be certain owners care way less about it than other ones.
Agreed. Thanks for your comments, and you're correct, Madam Chair.
I was quite surprised too that the number of the complaints were so few in that period of time. That was the whole summer. And what was it, 16 complaints? That's pretty, there's not many there. I'm really surprised at that.
Well, and the clerk can correct me if I'm wrong, but this has been ongoing for a few years when people were saying they were having problems. And we said, we don't have any data that you're having problems. No one's complaining.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the complaint started.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's very recent, but it's been obvious from those that, well, okay, we need to take a step further because there is an ongoing problem with, even if it's a small number,
Mm-hmm.
we cannot leave our residents unable to do anything about a problem, right? So this is why we have this ad hoc committee. Am I correct in that, Florence?
You got it. And just to add just a comment about the police and the OPP. The township, we don't get notified by the OPP of what they attend and what they do. So they may respond, a lot of people may call the OPP And if the OPP, seems to be able to manage it themselves, we don't ever hear about it. That doesn't mean that anything gets done about it, but we're not necessarily the first point of contact.
Okay, thank you, Florence. Any further questions or comments before I move on to the next item? Again, just speak up. I can't, you're all frozen in lovely facial contortions. Okay, boy, I amuse myself, don't I? Okay, item 4.2, short-term rental licensing survey to regulating municipalities. I swear this was T. Does anyone have any questions or comments about this? Please speak up. Then it is what it is, and we'll move on to the review of the current bylaws. And I guess this is where I was looking for direction. There's a significant amount of pages, about 20 pages on this, Florence. How would you like us to approach this? Or do you have a recommendation or?
Well, in the crystal ball of how I envision all this to go, the idea was that, the committee members would have thoroughly reviewed the bylaws. And if there was anything in particular that stood out as that looks effective or anything particular that looks excessive, I would like to have a bit of a consensus on what seems reasonable that would apply to ACW. As clerk and as administration, we never invent the wheel. We always just, rob and duplicate. So we usually, take a whole bunch of samples and you take pieces of bits and that you like and you mesh it together to suit your own circumstances. So the idea being that the members here would let staff know what they like, what they don't like. And then at the end of, the next few months after we've had a chance to review, I think there's 6 or 8 that are on the roster, then we would prepare a bylaw based on what the committee thought they liked. And then we would pull that together for review and consideration.
Okay, thank you. So before I open it up to that, I have a question because I should have commented on the last one. I was really struck by, I don't know, friendliness is the right word, the agreeability of everyone that you contacted to share information, to help you make your bylaws, to give you their honest comments and that. So when we look at the municipality of Blue Water, and I do have a couple of specific questions about it, but I'll let everyone else go first in case they ask my questions. That'll be great. Do we have a sense of how it's been working for them before we, tear it apart or applaud it?
So I haven't, I think it's a bit, well, I guess it's been a year, but I did not receive a response from Blue Water with those. I don't believe I saw a response from them in terms of my survey questions. So ultimately, if there are questions about a particular bylaw that seems to be open-ended, I can always reach out specifically and then, make a kind of have a little separate report next meeting on the unanswered questions. Yeah.
I have a question, I guess, is that in going over the different municipalities, I just wonder, like, I made some notes about each municipality. I wonder if that might be helpful for us to, because when I think about when I read it, and now that I'm we're talking about it, Kawartha, I had, some comments about Kawartha Lake and Wainfleet and Lambton Shores, but
Well,
would
let's
that
go
be
back to that agenda item then. If you'd like to do that, that'd be great, Mary. Go ahead.
okay?
We'll go back to 4.2.
Does that make sense to folks? Like if anyone had any comments about a specific municipality? Okay,
Cool.
well, I can just tell you a little bit. I looked at about Kawartha Lakes. One of the things that they highlighted, and I think more than once, is that it was a whole lot of work for the municipality, and an increase of 3 staff to monitor that. I think that's what I read. That's pretty significant for a small municipality. So, just in considering, sort of developing, a short-term rental policy, I think that's that would be a big expense to the municipality. And so trying to figure out how to do that in a way. So that was one of my comments about Kawartha Lake. Did anyone else have any thoughts about that?
Mary, I noticed that as well. And my question, and I'm not sure if it's a fair one, but a question I had to myself that I wasn't asking Florence, but now I am, was how comparable are they? Like when I think of Kawartha Lakes, what's up there? Isn't that like altruism? I mean, I'm not good at geography, but the number of short-term rentals per capita or per, is it comparable to our municipality, I guess?
When I was reviewing, I felt it was. If we consider the kilometers of lakeshore and the opportunities for short-term rentals,
Okay.
and in fact, we don't really have a solid number of who or how many. We were kind of given a bit of a gist. I think just also to point out to Mary's comment about increasing 3 staffs and at the expense of the municipality. Yes, it's increasing staff, but the expense ideally would be paid before by the licensing. Right. So it's not, the idea in the end is that it's not the tax base that pays for it. It's the licensing program that pays for it. That's why some of the fees, and when we look at the fees weren't, I don't believe the first fees were articulate in the bylaws presented, but I did get a chance to look them up. So when we get to them, I can get there. But the fees for the license is supposed to pay for the program, including the wages of those who facilitate it.
So we're looking for it to be revenue neutral, is what you're saying.
Well, ideally, it's a service, right? Like you're solving a problem that is caused by a certain particular segment of your municipality, and it's supposed to pay for it. It's like servicing water. If everybody uses, those who use the water system, those who use the short-term rental system should be paying for it. Right. That's kind of the.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I could make a comment, and that's the rub and why we have this ad hoc committee, is that it probably, I would suggest, would be inappropriate for 6,100 residents in our municipality to be expected to cover the cost of this when we only have a small number of individuals that are a challenge for our municipality and our staff. And that's the rub I would suggest for us to keep in mind, is that whatever we come up with as a path forward, we also need to consider who's responsible for covering the cost of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Mary, did you want to continue?
Sure. I think a couple of other municipalities had identified, an increase of staff time. But Lambton Shores, when they started for the first year, it was mandatory registration for all the short-term rentals, but free registration for the first year so that people could buy in, and that seemed like that might not be a bad approach. If you're gonna do it, you want to get the public support, and I think in most of the municipalities reports, getting public to buy in was pretty important, and keeping everybody informed was really important. So yeah, I don't know.
Comment, Mary, about that. My comment to that would be, I understand the first year free to buy in order to get people on board. My concern would be having the program user paid. Then how would the employee pay, any employee brought on by the township be paid that year? Or if there was a third party brought in for monitoring the expenses for that first year, how would all that be covered? I agree it's a way to get people on board to, entice them to get involved, but I'm not sure how that would be, or how our costs would be covered after that first year.
Yeah, and I don't know that of him for sure.
I agree with both of you. I mean, there are ways to cover it. We do have the K2 win benefit, which this would clearly be a community benefit to, make our community members happier. I mean, that could be an option to look at, but I think both those comments are valid and we should keep them in mind. Mary, would you like to continue?
I don't know if it's in this section because I don't have my full notes in front of me. But the hosting Gracious, or what was the name of the company that most of the municipalities were paying to monitor?
Like Gracious or
Granicus.
Yeah. What do you know what kind of cost that is?
Yes, at least for the first year. That was on the last agenda.
Yeah.
Bear with me. I'm having a total brain.
It's okay.
Sean, do you have that at the top of your head by chance? You look like you perked up there.
I think that there's another local municipality that I think the monitoring was about $5,000 a year, and I think the hotline was in the $1,500 to $2,000 a year.
Thank you.
That's what I understand.
Okay, any comments to that, Mary?
No, I guess I don't think I'm very clear about what they will do other than to monitor the Airbnb and VRBO sites. That's it, is it?
So my understanding, what they would do is they would keep track. They would scour the websites that advertise and would make, would kind of compile lists of the active Airbnbs in the area. And then you would kind of use that data to compare with your own, so that you make sure that they're licensed. So you're kind of always up to date on who's being licensed and who has, who's using their property as an STR. And then also they would provide a hotline so that if there are complaints, that they would be able to respond to that, that there's someone to answer to it.
Okay.
All right. I will say I really like the idea of that 24/7 hotline with the chance to get the host involved. I think that's pretty key. Any other comments? Sean, are you waving your hand?
I'm trying to wave my hand. I will just note that Lambton Shores mentioned it in a couple of the different questions that the complaint hotline, neighbors can call and submit or submit online to the short-term rental complaint hotline if there's an issue at a short-term rental, and they notify the rental's responsible person in real time so that they can attend and resolve the issue. And then on question 2, they mentioned that while they still have issues with select short-term rental properties, they've seen an increase in responsible hosting by the short-term rental operators. And there are several examples where our short-term rental hotline has resolved issues, noise and parking specifically, they mentioned, without the need to have bylaw intervene. So I just noticed that. And the other thing that Lambton Shores noticed or mentioned was that they haven't had to update their program in the 2 years that they've been running it, which I thought was notable.
Okay, thank you. And yes, I read that too and was quite impressed with those statements. Any other comments before we move on to 4.3?
Can we come back to the Granicus discussion briefly? Because there's money associated with using their services. And there were 3 out of the 5 respondents that actually said that they were using Granicus. But are we dealing with the same number of potential properties? I mean, Georgian Bay, Kawartha, Lambton Shores, is their total cottage base, and I'm not just talking about short-term rentals, but as far as the total base of cottages that they survey, is that the same in those areas as it would be in ACW? Florence, is that, when you were looking for comparables, is that something that you looked at as far as total recreational properties?
So I wouldn't have we don't have a data on total recreational properties. You know, we would have, I'd have to, it would, I'm just trying to think of a process that we would take to kind of count that. So when we looked at comparables, it was more so population size comparables, whether they had some kind of lake shore, lakefront, and whether the place was reputable for having some kind of destination, you know, where you would rent, where you would be able to rent something. So, you know, in Ramera, in Kawartha Lakes, in Lambton Shores, those are all also ones that have had kind of reputations of being hot spots for short-term rental bylaws. That's how I found the comparators. I don't have property specific data for how many households there are in terms of specific to the lake or specific cottages.
I'm just wondering if it was the same, you know, if they're dealing with the same magnitude of scale as far as they're spending the money, you know, to do some pretty sophisticated monitoring and tracking, and we just don't have the numbers that necessarily warrant it. But again, I'm just talking off the top of my head. I don't know whether they're comparable or not.
That's about, I think that is part of the issue. We don't know what we have, so hard to find it comparable. I'm interrupting because Glenn, I'm gonna need to go get some more hot tea. If you could take over chairing for a moment, please.
Okay, happy to do that, Madam Chair. So yes, please continue the discussion. Mike, did you have an additional comment to make on this?
Similar to what Mary did, I think that, you know, I didn't look at it as far as by township, as far as what the responses were. I was looking more for general themes that were coming through on their comments. And certainly as far as what made it effective bylaw, what were the effective components, there was probably 3 or 4 that kind of rose to the surface in those general comments. You know, one was that the STRs should have a code of conduct, that there need to be occupancy limits established within the bylaws, that there definitely need to be penalties for non-compliance, and that some kind of complaint hotline would be important, whether that's something that is contracted out to a firm like Granicus, or it's something that is internally managed, which, you know, again, I'm throw that out there simply without consideration that that there's cost associated with it, but clearly there is importance to having some kind of hotline to monitor the complaints. The other issues, and I think Mary also touched on these already, and again, it was kind of a common theme as far as what this committee should be aware of going forward. First of all, there is the ongoing commitment of staff time. As this goes down the road a little bit further, be aware of the fact that there is going to be some public pushback, not necessarily always from the STR owners, but also maybe from those that feel it's not being aggressive enough. Be mindful of, and I think we're okay in this regard as far as being transparent as far as the process is concerned. And I'm sure that there will be further public consultation once some kind of draft bylaw is presented for consideration. So I thought there was some, as I said, there were some general themes that came through, and those are the ones that I identified.
Thank you for those comments. Mike, any additional comments of any other members? I would suggest that the take home for me, is that the second mouse to the trap gets the cheese. And there have been different municipalities have put forth or engaged options, and it is in evidence by the responses that the hotline that Lambton Shores has engaged in, they feel has been effective. And that's a pretty good take-home message, I would suggest. So I see our chair back. I'll pass it back to you, Madam Chair, and we just rounded up the discussion on that.
Well, Glenn, if you're okay with it, I'm kind of running out of air here when I talk. So if you don't mind chairing the rest of the meeting in the absence of the vice chair.
Yeah, no worries at all. Okay, cool. So anything else on that anyone would like to comment on before we move forward? And if not, We'll move on to the, I guess, do you feel comfortable that we've reviewed for 2, 3, and 4? Clerk, you good with that?
I don't think we've started reviewing the bylaws yet. So we've just had a chance to kind of comment on the comments from the staff on their programs.
Okay.
I think we should have a look first at the municipality of Blue Water, the licensing bylaw that was there.
Okay, let's go to that.
May I bother the chair for a second?
Oh, is that new?
Before we get into the actual discussion on the bylaws, my understanding is that from today's review and the next 2 meetings that we have, we'll be delving into these bylaws from other townships. And then ultimately, we are to recommend a draft for an ACW bylaw. So my question is, before we start this bylaw review, is what is the process going to be for us? What are the options? Do we cherry pick from each of the different bylaws that we review and say, yep, that's a good point. I like this one. I don't like this one. Or after we've done our initial review, say, all right, overall, the best starting point might be this particular bylaw. And then we go through and we tweak that one with suggestions from the other ones that we liked. So my question is more on process as opposed to, digging into each individual bylaw at this stage.
And your question is well taken.
Yes, that was my question to Florence at the very beginning. Way less well worded.
Yep. No, that's cool. Well taken. And on process, I'll defer to clerk. What would you suggest, Florence, is the best process for a path forward?
So, I mean, it's up to the committee. Like if you guys want to go through each one line by and see, not necessarily line by, but each member, contribute what they cherry pick, that's fine. Or you can, let me know at the end of this, if we have these ones, we talk about them. And then at the end you say, you know what, we think that Blue Waters was the best one. But with incorporating the piece from Romera about code of conduct. Is that what you're kind of getting at, Mike?
Correct.
Okay.
And this is deep. Yeah, please, clerk.
It's up to you. I will draft the bylaw however you tell me to draft it. So
This is deep and it's easy to get into the weeds. However, Mike brought up, as did Jennifer, the correct question. What's the best process? What would anyone suggest? Jennifer, please.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to suggest that, because my understanding, Florence, is you're going to give us a couple every meeting, correct, from different municipalities.
Yeah, I didn't think it would be fair to give you all of them at the same time. I thought it'd be a good idea to go through a couple of them, kind of wrap your heads around them, and then compare them, and maybe they're all vastly the same, and maybe there's pieces of it that you don't like.
So yeah, I think for myself anyway, what might be easiest is, since we're getting them 2 at a time and without having them lined up together to go, this says this, which I agree is far too onerous, say, well, I like this, I don't like this, and just keep track of that as we go along. And then at the end, summarize and say, well, this is what people kind of liked and didn't like. Is that what we want in our bylaw, rather than, it's 20 some pages long and they're all going to be that long. So to compare them line by line might be somewhat problematic.
So from an administrative standpoint, a 20-page bylaw, the meat of a 20-page bylaw is always about, 4 or 5 pages. If you take out the jargon, you take out the definitions are important, don't get me wrong, but those are things that we can figure out as we go. I'm more worried about the general regulations. I'm worried about the requirements for licensing, and I'm worried about the penalties and all, like whether you have a demerit point system in there, and also also about what the cost will be to start the licensing of itself. So there's a few elements, don't get hung up on the, I like this definition better than the other one right now, because I think we'll get to that. And maybe I think in the schedule, we put aside a couple of meetings that don't have a whole lot there. And I think we may spend some time on definitions in the end to kind of really narrow in on what we mean. But I think what I would like to do and what I was kind of prepared to do is you guys talk and I will write down the points that seem to make most sense. Like when you say, I really like this piece about the demerit points. This particular one, it made sense to me. I think we should have that included in the draft. And does everybody agree on that? Yeah, that sounds like something that we could look into. And if there's somebody who's vehemently opposed to it, then it's worth discussing and whether that needs to be, quote, less restrictive as an example, as a result of the, if not everybody's on board in the same way. So I've spoken a lot here, but.
No, you haven't. You're a great resource. So, and you're trying to limit us from drinking out of a fire hose, and we appreciate that. So, Jennifer, I think you had a comment, and then Sean, and I don't want Mr. Becker to think he's just drawing air here. I would like a comment from you in process, Mark. So first, Jennifer, Sean, and Mark in that order.
I'm actually going to do very little speaking. I know I keep saying that, but I have two specific questions about the Blue Water one, and then I'm just going to sit and listen. With a comment that, Florence, I would appreciate if you could reach out before the next meeting just to see if they like it. Like if they have any comments of their own about what's working and what's not. They may or may not reply, but it'd be nice if with each bylaw we had a comment from the municipality. My first question is page 31 of 72. There's licensing fees, and to obtain a short-term rental license by providing false information is $500, which doesn't seem like if you got it by lying, I think you should get your head slammed, not a bit of a fine. I'm just like, oh, well, if I lie, I get a little bit of a fine. So I'm not a real fan of liars getting breaks. And the second one is a question, actually, and it's page 34. And I do have a thick head right now, but I was trying to figure out the refunds that went from 90 to 20. And is this a staggered way of paying people or different people? I just didn't understand those 4 boxes at all, actually. If you could clarify that for me, and then I'll just listen.
Okay,
My understanding of that was the complexity of the application and whether or not they had any issues. I think it went from, we didn't get around to dealing with your application and you no longer have an STR, you get a big refund, versus going all the way down to, we had bylaw issues, you're not getting a refund. That was my brief understanding of that. If anybody else has any comments or different understanding?
Does that make sense, Jennifer? Does that answer your question?
Well, a little bit. I would hope that when people are asking, we have a better understanding of it than I do when we answer the question.
Okay. Sean, you have a comment, please? I know it's good, so maybe if, you may be muted.
Yeah, I am muted. I wasn't going to comment on the process. I was just going to comment about what I liked from both of the agreements, but maybe, I don't know if there's some merit in taking different sections that we liked or different parts and just putting them in a parking lot, and we can review them all against others later, maybe. The Blue Water document, Article 11, the demerit point system. Generally, I like it. I like the way that it's weighted. The only part that I really wasn't keen on was 11.3, 11.4. It says the short term.
Sean, if I could, just for everyone, you're on page
27 of 72.
Thank
11.3 and 11.4.
Yes.
It says short-term rental license may be revoked. I think that would sound better if it shall be revoked. So I guess that's my comment there. I like the way that they've weighted the demerit points and set the bar to the penalties. The one thing that I didn't like about the Blue Water document was the appeal process. The appeals go directly to council, and if you were going to be dealing with a certain amount of appeal that could be onerous, the Remera, is that how you say that?
Yes.
Their appeal process, they actually had a committee of adjustment or a bylaw committee that reviews the appeals for a decision. So that's the one thing I liked out of that. The other thing I noticed, both documents had $2 million insurance. I don't know if that's enough these days or not, but it seemed low to me.
Good comment. Becker, process. Mr. CAO, what comment would you have for us on this, please?
I think we're doing just fine. I think it's a great idea that you come up with the things you do like and the things you don't like. And I see Florence is writing it down, and I think you can compile them at the end, and then we go through it and agree or disagree.
I concur. I like that parking lot idea, you know, things to consider. And if there's something that we feel strongly about to have in place or strongly about not to have in place, this is a time for the discussion. Jennifer, I believe you had an additional comment, please.
Yeah, I'm really trying not to talk here. I agreed with Sean's comments. The only, and I'm not sure how I think about this, but it has occurred to me, it's to be suspended. We're on 11.3 and 11.4 still. So it can be suspended for a period not longer than 6 months, which basically is the whole rental season, or it shall be revoked. But I wonder if we shouldn't do it more like if you get a bunch of demerits on your license, you got to drive over to Kitchener and explain to somebody why you should be able to drive still, rather than, you know, or it's suspended until you tell us what you've done that we're not going to suspend you. Like, what have you done to fix these continuing demerits, you know? So rather than saying you're suspended for 6 months, say you are suspended until you have told us how you have fixed your ongoing problems. Like, put a breathalyzer on the car or something, you know, that kind of thing.
I hear you. I hear you. Okay, additional comments, please.
I should
Mr. Chair?
never had to go to Kitchener or put a breathalyzer on my car. I just, but I know people who have, but it wasn't me.
Okay, Mary first and then Mike, please.
I guess I just have a thought, and you know, when I was going over the bylaws and I was looking at them, and the expectation through the eyes of an owner of a short-term rental, you know, and the expectations seem so great, and how do we, like, how do you sell that to the public? To say, yeah, we want to do all this. We want to provide you with a plan. Like, how do you sell that? And I think that's one of the things that the committee should be looking, you know, that we should be looking at as well, is what's the benefit for the person who's buying who's getting the license? And I think there are benefits in terms of you know, safety and, you know, being a part of the community. But I just think that it would be helpful to sort of say, okay, what are our goals? What's a goal here? Like, we want to create a bylaw, but what's the most important thing? What are the most important things for us? Why are we doing it? You know, why does it make sense to have short-term rental policy, right? And I know we know that pretty well, but to be able to define that as a committee and then make sense for the people who are short-term rental owners and for the community. Does that make sense to anybody, or am I just?
No, it does, Marion, and I would suggest that we have had a request by some individuals in our municipality to address this concern. So as a council, we have a moral responsibility, I will suggest, to respond to legitimate concerns, whether it be for safety or well-being of all residents in our municipality. So those concerns have been expressed to council, and it was council's decision and direction to have this ad hoc committee to address those and bring back recommendations to be implemented for the cost of doing business. And short-term rentals is a business to some. And we need to respect the business and also the residents in our municipality that may be affected by this business being transacted. Does that make sense?
It does, but I think that you know, people have been doing short-term rentals forever. Like a lot of people have been doing short, and I think in Huron County, a lot of people have been doing short-term rentals, and they may not necessarily consider it a business, and that, you know, they may not pay HST, they may not, you know, and they rent it out to family and friends, and to be able to be able to sell it to those people that this is an important thing, because they're part of our community, you know, they're part of our community, and they've been doing it for a long time, and it's a big shift for them. Now, you know, people who buy 5 properties and, you know, aren't, you know, or don't live in the community, or this is an investment, it's a very different thing, you know. And so you know, I think when we're creating bylaws, I think it's just a big shift. And how do you do that?
But without a question, before I go to Jennifer, I agree with you. This is something that has evolved to the point that council felt the need to address it. And so, you know, I'll leave it there and then go to Jennifer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I concur with you, Mary. I'm speaking as a director of that owns a short-term rental, and when it doesn't go well, it's our neighbors, right? And it is a business for us, but we want it to go well. But I mean, education is such a key piece of it, and having bylaws that you can post and say, these are the rules, not this is how you should behave, because unfortunately, there's a new trend where people have to be reminded of how they should behave, and perhaps reminded with a penalty, some of them. So I think education is a big piece of it, but I also wonder if we couldn't reward good behavior. So initially everyone licenses after so many years, seasons, whatever it is, with no complaints, your fee is less every year. And the higher your complaints are every year, I mean, it's like workers' comp. If you get a complaint on workers' comp, okay, you can have one, but if you get another one, then your rates go up, and they go up permanently until you have a track record of no complaints. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't build something like this so that our long-term residents who don't see it as a business, and maybe it's just a sideline, and maybe it's just to their extended family, are rewarded for good behavior. You have a carrot and a stick, not just a stick. That's my comment.
I agree with that, Jennifer, and I like that. And I think we all understand, we all respond better to a carrot than a stick. And so I think that's a great comment that you brought up. Mike, do you have a follow-up, and then I'll go to Ian, please.
Yeah, just a couple of things, if I may. Glenn, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was that we are undertaking this project on bylaws really to make sure that we look after all of the stakeholders involved in this process. You know, not only the STR owners, but the renters who are renting those STRs, the neighbors of those STRs, and ultimately the potential liability of the township as well, if something goes sideways. So I think that's the reason why we are, or at least that's my understanding, why we are doing this. So again, I stand to be corrected, but that's my perspective on things.
And I concur.
Again, because I'm rather simple-minded when we're looking at such complex legal documents, when we had the 2 that we were presented with for this meeting, I reviewed one, then I looked at the second one, and I said, you know what? I like the first one that I looked at better. And it's interesting that the one that I liked better was of the two was the Blue Water one. And interestingly enough, Blue Water probably did what we are in the process of doing right now, is that they learned from the work of others. Their bylaw was drafted in 2023. Ramera was done 3 years prior to that. So they have perhaps structured it with a little bit more detail. And I actually do like the way they structured it with multiple sections. And I found it as a layman, a lot easier to follow. So in my own review of this, I asked about process earlier, I followed the Blue Water template. And then I said, right, what is it that I liked in their template or in their version? What are items in there that I either don't understand or that it would perhaps question? And was there anything in the Romero one that I felt would be necessary to supplement that? So that was, again, we started about 15 minutes ago talking about process. So just to share with you, that's the process that I went through. And a number of folks have already commented on certain specifics that they have in the Blue Water document. And if Florence would like, I could do likewise at this point.
Bert, would you concur that that would be welcome?
At the will of the committee.
Yes. Yeah. I think, is the committee all good with that? If someone displays the due diligence to do that as Mike has offered, I think that's great. Before I leave you, Mike, and go to Ian, was there anything in Romera that you felt was absent in Blue Water that should be included?
I think if anything, that the Blue Water document was perhaps more comprehensive in the approach that it took to a few of the areas, such as inspections, as an example. And again, it may be something that we decide as a committee that's too onerous for us, but at least they dealt with that subject, and it gives us a reason to at least visit that point.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that option is always good to have included, as opposed to not included. Ian, please.
Thank you. I think we have to keep in mind that if we make it too onerous, people just aren't gonna follow it. They're gonna say, well, I don't rent it out, or I'm not a short-term renter, I just lend it to my family or my friends, and we're gonna increase the cash flow of some people. No, they're not gonna do it in the books, they're gonna do it under the table. So I think we have to be aware of that. But I think the whole thing has to be simple and easy to understand. And going back through and picking and cherry picking the what we do like from the different ones, I think is a good idea. There's no need to reinvent any kind of wheel.
Great comments, Ian. And yeah, we want it simple. We want it understandable. We want it to address the concerns with the necessary language that provides us that opportunity to do that. Absolutely right. CAO, do you have any additional comments at this time before we move forward?
No, I'm like a sponge. I'm just soaking it all up.
No, aren't we all? Okay, so we kind of like the Blue Water one. Is there anything within Blue Water that anyone says, I do not like that? Evan, did you have a comment, please?
I think the one thing for Blue Water would maybe be the fines if we're comparing the two bylaws that are in front of us. Blue Water is a lot easier on the fines than Romera is. So I think that'd be the one thing to discuss, how heavy we go on the fines for anybody.
That's a really good comment, Evan, and I concur with you 100%. When there is an offender, we want it substantial enough that this doesn't reoccur. Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Jennifer, and then I believe the clerk had a comment.
Yeah, and she's probably going to comment what I'm about to ask her. It's hard to say, is this too high, if this is too low, because we haven't seen them all. If at some point, maybe towards the end, when we're about to decide on the fines, we have a comparison of what the fines are in all the different municipalities, because there will be a range, and then at least we're not picking numbers out of the sky or based on what one or two other municipalities said.
Okay, thanks for that. Clerk, please.
So, does anybody have a guess of what we're gonna play a little game of trivia here right now. Does anybody have a good guess as to what the application fee is at Remera? Did anybody do a little extra digging, extra points? The application, so to submit your application, $3,000 is the fee.
That'd be pretty interesting.
If you wanna, I think, if you want to have, if you have to have a demerit point meeting, so you have to have a meeting to discuss the fact that you're not abiding by the rules, it costs $500 to have that meeting. A hearing for a 15 demerit point hearing is $500. Appeal license refusal is $500. And appeals to the appeals tribunal is $500. So that's Remera.
Hmm.
And to note, they increased their fees substantially after the first year. I think they doubled it. They originally had a $1,500. I think Kelly's got something.
I do. Just to add some context, I did find out, Florence and I attended a presentation on Remera. They have 80 short-term rentals, just to give you an idea. And they have 87 on a waiting list because they have a 300-meter setback between each short-term rental. So that really dictates how many they have in the township.
Interesting. That's good info. Thanks, Kelly. And you know, that's okay. I'll go to Jennifer, please.
I probably should know this, but where is Remera? I've never heard of it. And it didn't occur to me to look it up on a map until just right now. Is that northern? Is that on the lake?
It's like Peterborough, somewhere is in there.
Oh, okay.
It's around Casino-Rama, if I did my research right. Kind of up around the top end of Lake Simcoe, around the Casino-Rama area.
Yeah, in
I
between.
concur with that, not far from Barrie. Yeah.
In there somewhere.
And you know, that's very interesting that Remera put it in place that long ago. And I'll go back to Nicholas's comment. And they saw the need to increase the fees substantially, as our clerk said, maybe double them. There's a message there, probably to set them high enough up front. Clerk, please. I see
The other thing that I was going to mention was when we originally, and this is talking about the process, when we originally decided that when this topic was originally brought up and it was requested a couple of times, well, maybe we should look into it. The theme from staff at the time was, why don't we let some other municipalities pave the way first so that we're not the ones spending the time and I mean, we still have to do this because there's, as Mike pointed out, the public process is invaluable and it must be done. Otherwise, we can't just impose these rules, especially because they are so different than what any other rule is that we go by. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that bylaw enforcement in general, we still pay for that. So the tax base pays for bylaw enforcement. We don't submit enough fines or we don't lay enough charges to even remotely begin to cover the cost of bylaw enforcement. And that was my one other comment. So irrespective of, even if we, to Jennifer's idea of moving it to, the more you obey the rules and the more time goes by and you get a reduced fee, the principle of it being a complete user pay system may not be there because we're still going to have bylaw enforcement for non-short-term rentals. So there may be a little bit of overlap in terms of that, so I hope that rings a bell. And the other one was the reduction in the application fees in Blue Water. I thought that from my perspective reading it, it still costs to do it. I think it makes more sense to reduce the fee year over year if the issues are not there. But in one season, if I think that's administratively a nightmare. That looks like a lot of work.
Correct. So at the risk of not reading the room correctly, do we all concur that we probably would respect Romera's fees that they have in place because they have experienced that, as opposed to the fees that Blue Water have established? Is that a fair comment? Jennifer, please.
Not actually, I wouldn't call it unfair. It's just Blue Water only started a year ago and we are unclear as to what their reaction is. Maybe they're thinking we need to increase it. Maybe they're thinking, I think the comments from the actual host municipality is just as important as, do they think they have it right before we model it after them, right? Or do they think their fees are correct? And we might, more information is good information, right?
Yeah,
I'd
I
like to
can
have that
concur with-
before I talk about actual numbers, and I'd like to see a few more municipalities too. I think it's
Totally,
good.
we will. And
Yeah.
Clerk, is it a fair question to ask of you to reach out to Romera that we're discussing tonight and Blue Water and just ask them their perspective on their fees, whether they feel they're appropriate or should be adjusted moving forward?
No, totally. In hindsight, it was my intention to have their comments alongside it. And then when we had prepared the work plan and when we had received the survey results, I realized they hadn't responded. So I didn't have them to give to you. The other ones, I have all of the other ones, I have them, just not these ones. So no, I will do the extra legwork on this one and get that for you.
Thank you very much. CAO Becker, please.
So the fees would only be probably they would accumulate whatever costs they have and it'd be divided amongst the number of STRs there are. So it would be different for every municipality. Some might be lower because they might only have 20 cottagers or short-term rentals. And like Romera, if they were at 80, it all depends on what you put in to get out to pay for it, because it's supposed to be it's just like water rates. The cost of the whole department to run it is split amongst everyone. And I think that's how the fees are run. If I'm out to lunch, Florence, correct me. And then the charges and the fines, I think maybe to make it simple at the end when we're all done looking at all of them, that perhaps staff can prepare a report showing the fines and what everyone has, and we can pick and choose whichever one we want.
I agree with those comments and thank you for that. The cost of the program is divided amongst those that participate in it. You're absolutely correct. And yeah, if you divide X number of dollars by 100, gets you a different number than if you divide X number of dollars by 40. Totally right. Yep. Clerk, please.
I was just going to say that, just kind of riding on that train of thought, if, say the first year you do an estimate and then running on to year 2, you based your fees based on what happened to year 1, it kind of fluctuates year over year based on the cost of running the program. That way you have a true recoup of your costs year over year, as opposed to just as opposed to it being $3,000 and it stays $3,000 every year, where what is the surplus or the deficit? It's supposed to be user pay. It's it's not supposed to create a surplus, right? And I think that might be a way to look at that.
I concur with that 100%. I think we all do. Is that a reasonable comment? This is a user pay system, and it's not appropriate for 6,100 residents to contribute to this. The individuals that are involved in this business or STRs are the ones that are responsible for the cost, and it needs to be fluid on adjustment. We can set a fee, and after a year we may say, well, yeah, that's pretty good. 80% would have worked, or we need to increase it by 20%. We have to start somewhere with our best guesstimate on the information that we have provided, make the best decisions at that time. Is that reasonable to everyone? Mike Nicholas, please.
Yeah, just a comment on that as far as the fees are concerned. Two potential issues that, say, a higher fee may result in. One is driving some of the business underground, which then becomes more of an enforcement issue. And Kawartha Lakes actually made a comment in the survey that they had actually seen a reduction of in the number of STRs ownership in their community. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? So, I mean, I think the original survey that we conducted suggested that STRs are a good thing economically for the community. So to drive them out of the community is not a good thing. But you also don't want the bad actors remaining either.
You're absolutely correct, and it's not our place to be involved in commerce. It's just a matter that it is responsible commerce for those involved and the neighbors.
Yep. Once again, protecting all stakeholders.
Totally right. Florence, please.
One element that I was hoping to get some clarification from on the committee as to whether you liked it or not. One of the amendments that Romera had done was the limit of rental accommodations within 300 meters of each other. Was that a fair thing to say that they could do that, or what is the thoughts here?
It's an interesting question. I'm glad you brought it up, and I believe Mr. Thomas may have a comment to make.
Yeah, so I did notice that, and I noticed in the Blue Water document, page 21, number 5.1 and 5.2, Blue Water prohibits the operation of short-term rentals on abutting properties, and that they limit it to 15% of properties that front on any one street. And then 5.2, they have a grandfather clause in there, which if you were operating before the bylaw, they'll allow you to continue operating. So the 300 meters, and then I noticed this, and I think that that's something, I don't know that we'll decide that here tonight, but I think that's something that we do need to take some consideration of is how dense do we want these short-term rentals to be in any given location.
Thanks for that. Before I go to Jennifer, I will suggest that it's not, I'd have a challenge. If I had a short-term rental, like how do you decide who comes first? There's two of them within 300 meters. So which one has a priority? And if there is an interest in a specific area for STRs, is it up to us to say which ones should be able to do business and which ones shouldn't? I'd have a little problem with that. So I have a little question for the committee on that 300 meter situation. Thanks for bringing that up. Jennifer and then Mary, please.
Yeah, I have comment, then big surprise, a question. Comment, I really like the grandfathered in thing, because then if you have it, then you don't have to prioritize. And I think the reason, I'm guessing one of the reasons they did that is because certain areas they're driving out. Short-term rentals are a good thing, but they also take away available housing in certain areas, right? So if they're all short-term rentals, then it causes other problems. I don't think we all need the talk on that. My question, I can't even make a comment on this, and I'll tell you why, because I don't even know, 300 meters, how close are the cottages or the seasonal residents down at the lake? I don't even know what 300 meters are. Is that how far they are apart, or are they closer? Like, I do not have a term of reference for how that fits in our lakeshore, and I'm sure many of you do, but I do not. So that number means nothing to me in a context of what we actually have, and we don't actually even know what we have. But you know, if you look down at the lakeshore, pick any road, and I know how close those residents are together. Is that 300 meters, or does that obliterate all of our lakeshore? What does that number mean?
Jennifer, you'd probably have 15 cottages within 300 meters.
Well, okay. So, I mean, that's kind of a ridiculous number for ACW, really.
It is. It's totally ridiculous. No, they're a lot denser than that. And I think our clerk had a comment to make.
I was just going to say that's like 700 feet, just for perspective, isn't it?
No, 1,000 feet.
I don't know, somewhere's in there. That's a
How
lot.
many-
Like,
Close
how
to
many
1,000
want
feet.
back here in America?
I don't know, but
No.
if you think there's 15 in that, like that sounds
Yeah.
like.
So Jennifer, ours would be less than 50 meters. Maybe even 20 meters would be more accurate.
Correct.
Good
10 in some
point.
cases.
Yeah, right.
I don't even know how we could even consider that bylaw. So
No,
until
exactly.
some road gets it.
And
Yeah.
that's why we're having this discussion, because that's what was relevant in their area. And I would suggest, and that we all agree, that is not applicable in ACW. Clerk and then CAO, please.
So if I can comment, I'll believe, I might speak to the rationale for the 300 meters. The premise behind, I believe, and the first time I heard of that was with the township of Tiny, which is all the way up at Penetanguishene. The premise was that short-term rentals in dense situations were changing the nature of the cottage community. So when you have one every 300 meters, the very nature of your cottage community doesn't necessarily change. It means that there's a few here and there that get rented out, versus if you had one, if you allowed them to happen wherever, without having a restriction or even like a number, like if you only allowed 80 as an example, then if you didn't have that, all of a sudden the nature of that community completely changes. It now becomes, an open hotel is what it becomes. So
Right.
that, I think that was the premise behind having the distance, is so that the nature of the community doesn't change.
Right. I'll suggest that's not applicable in ACW. CAO, and then I believe Mary, please.
I was just going to say the same thing, Florence, because I was part of that Tiny Township presentation in Toronto, and it was basically saying we have a community here, and if everything was short-term rental, there's no community anymore because they're all gone, and no one's going to the same beer store and the liquor store and the grocery store and the gas station, because they're just coming in for the weekend and they're gone again. So I'm sure nobody goes to the beer store or liquor store, but I think that was the premise of it. So I'm sorry to hog the floor, but Mary.
That was my point as well, is that it's about changing community, and respecting the people who live there full time. I think about Bayfield and Blue Water, and a whole street, like there may be 5 or 6 Airbnbs, and that's changed since they've made the regulations, and people in Bayfield are really appreciative of that. But when you've got 3 or 4 in one street, you have a hell of a weekend, that's for sure. You don't, you got to close your windows in the summertime, right?
Thanks for that, Mary. Florence, please.
Just also a point to highlight the grandfathering clause, and I've made an assumption that everybody knows what that is, but basically you are allowed to keep what you have until you no longer have it, and then you move on. So if it was that you couldn't have an abutting, Airbnbs cannot be abutting each other. If they were abutting each other, they could stay that way until they don't get a license anymore, until they choose not to get a license, and then that grandfather clause won't apply to that property anymore, and then it kind of spaces it out the way that the bylaw intends it to happen. And again, there's this, and I get this, the committee knows this, there's a balance between the business and the STR owners having a right to be able to do that versus keeping the integrity of the community that they are residing in. So
Thank you for that. And I think we'd all, I'll suggest, agree the grandfathering in is something that would be, we would have an appetite for. And it is not the mandate of this committee to change our municipality as to where the STRs are currently are. I don't believe it's our mandate to change that. We just need to put a bylaw in place that would adhere to compliance. That's all, that we can all get along, as Mary said. Is that reasonable? Jennifer, please.
And I'm not sure this is applicable. It's a question to process. One of the, and not necessarily in something you've presented, Florence, but I have obviously been looking at this for a while. And there are municipalities who designate areas of, we don't want STRs here. And I'm not suggesting that ACW is like that. And certainly we don't even know what we have. But let's say that we license, we grandfather, we don't have any 300 meters or whatever it is what it is. And then after a period of time, we recognize that we do have a sensitive area, or there's enough STRs there, or, you know, whatever it is would there be a place in the future to add that should we feel it was needed once we saw what we had, or maybe, you know, saw a community disappearing because of God knows what's happening, but, you know, is there a place for it in the future if we deem it is necessary, if we deem it's not necessary now?
Yeah, so council, when they pass these bylaws, they have the opportunity to amend them. The province has no legislation that regulates short-term rentals. So the township is very free to kind of do that as they see fit. You know, there's nothing that says that grandfathering has to happen. You know, I guess that's what you're getting at, is that if once grandfathered, does it stay that way? No. Not here, because there's no legislation like similar to the Planning Act where there would be, you know, there would be something that legal non-conforming is what you call it.
Right. So
the bylaws changed, you can
That
change
wasn't
it.
actually the question. I mean, that was part of the question, but it was more, they're all grandfathered in, we're happy where they are, and there is previously a section that has 3 out of 20, and now because we don't have any limitation of how many you can have, now there's 5 out of 20, and next year there's 7 out of 20, and that area appears to be a spot that's now becoming, instead of a cottage association, a stretch of 20 STRs. Is there a time at that point to say we're going to limit STRs to this number of meters, or this location has enough, or something like that, which they do proactively in some other municipalities? I see you.
I think I think I follow what you're saying, and I think it's harder to take away than it is to implement. Yeah, I think there's always, you can change the rules, but then you'll have to deal with those that are you know, if there were 4 that were added in 2 years, and after 2 years you decide, no, we want to go back down to 2.
No, I'm not saying go back down to 2. I'm saying stop it. Like no more can come then to stop it from being destroyed. Could you add that then?
I see no reason why you couldn't.
correct. And I'll suggest, Jennifer, to address your comment, question, concern. We identified the individuals in this committee for your expertise and your common sense to come up with the best plan. Will it be perfect? Probably not. It will be the best that we can come up with the information that we have. And it will be fluid, that if we see after a period of time, be it a year or 2 years or whatever, it can be changed or revisited as it needs, as a situation may arise to address that we don't have it right the first time. Is that reasonable, Clerk?
Oh, that's the nature of our work. It's constantly changing and evolving. I was just going to suggest that this distance apart for different, I think this is a piece for the quote parking lot. I see there's some nods. I think it's worth the committee members to think. It'll likely present itself in the other bylaws as well. And we should maybe take that one and put that one aside and maybe think on, you know, what is the purpose of the bylaw versus having restrictions on how many. So I will suggest, I've heard, and I know Evan's got his hand up here, but I think we'll put that one in the proverbial parking lot.
Yeah, is everyone good to put that in the parking lot? We just not sure we want to put that in place this time. Okay, Evan, please.
Just a comment, as we put it in the parking lot, for grandfather, are we talking the property is grandfathered or the current owner is grandfathered? Just maybe something to think about when it comes out of the parking lot. Is that property always allowed to have one? Or if that owner sold the property, if the next owner would have to reapply if they wanted one or not? Just maybe something to think about when we speak of it later.
Good question. Clerk, please.
I was just going to say, I think they refer to the licenses are grandfathered. So once you don't have the license anymore, it's not about the property, it's about the license. So,
Reasonable.
anyway, something to think about it.
Good question. Okay, so what about else? We're going to kind of revisit the fines, if you want to call them that, and that's maybe not the appropriate word. And I think we all kind of feel we want them high enough. And Romera's, in their wisdom, saw to adjust it. Florence is going to reach out to both to see if they're comfortable with that. And Blue Water, it's new. Do they feel comfortable? And it is all a matter of how many infractions there are. If there's minimal infractions, there's less cost. And if there's more, it needs to be addressed. Is that reasonable with everyone? Is there anything else that anyone wants to comment or put in the parking lot on this? Okay.
John looks like he's got his hand.
Sean, please.
I'm going back to the appeal process. I did like Romero's appeal process better. And I wonder if staff's going to be reaching out and talking to these folks if maybe you can get a feel for how often they have to go through that appeal process and how they like their processes at both municipalities.
That's a really good comment, because whether you speak of a committee adjustment as a appeal process or all of council, there's a cost to doing that. And that needs to be considered and addressed in an appeal, because again, the individuals involved should pay for it, not the 6,100 residents. Great comment. Anything additional on this before we leave? And this has been a really good discussion. Mr. Nicholas, please.
One other thing that we'll likely see come up with the other bylaws as well, as far as a requirement for the representative of the STR to be within a certain distance or from a certain time, travel time from the STR to deal with any issues, and what's the appropriate amount.
So, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So just to be a devil's advocate on that, why? If they adhere to the regulations that are set out, why does where they live an issue?
Well, I guess if there is an issue at the STR because of some wild party going on or a noise complaint, is it not the owner of the STR's the primary responsibility to deal with it? And if he can't reach these people by phone, does he have to attend the property?
Great comment. Good discussion. Jennifer, please.
Yeah, I think Mike makes a good point, because, for example, I know of a relative of mine who lives 1,000 miles away, but they have a local property agent who makes sure it gets cleaned, gets the key there. I mean, it maybe doesn't have to be the owner, because there are a lot of Americans who own this property, but they will have someone local doing their cleaning and letting the person in and stuff. So they should have at least a local agent that can be a property. I stayed in Airbnb in I don't know, Thousand Lakes, is that what it's called, this summer? And they lived in Texas, but there was a property manager who came and checked with us and all that stuff. So maybe it doesn't have to be the owner, but it should be their delegated agent. There has to be someone local.
So that's just an item for Florence's laundry list, as far as that the bylaw should incorporate something as far as a requirement for, a local representative to be able to deal with any issues, whether it's shown on the license, whether it's shown on the application form, but designated somewhere and referenced in the bylaw.
And great discussion, good point. And maybe the terminology would be owner and or agent. And if there's someone there, who cares where they live if there's someone there looking after it? And that's the concern you address. Is that correct, Mr. Nicholas?
Yes, and again, I think in the definitions of the various bylaws, we'll see reference to owner, agent, representative, manager, whatever, however the terminology is. That's wordsmithing.
Yeah, totally. Clerk, please.
I was just going to say the in the interest of the municipality and the workload, the onus needs to be on the owner to make sure that their tenants are obeying the rules, right? So to Sean's point at the beginning, having that 1-800 number is the first stop, so that there's someone who can connect, or another municipality, they publish their contacts for their residences on the website. So they have a short term, and I can't remember, I think it's one of these two that we're dealing with here today. They literally have the listed properties. They have a contact name and a phone number. They've gone that far. So, but I think the premise is making sure that the onus stays on the owner to be able to deal with it. I mean, obviously, like if it's getting too loud and they need the assistance of the OPP or whatever have you, but and bylaw will step in when they need to, and especially on persistent things, and that's when the licensing process comes into place and the demerit points, all that. But the first call should not be bylaw, which can't be bylaw, not in the setup that we have.
Right on. And I'll suggest we have made great progress tonight in establishing the owner and or agent with the applicable fines being at the correct level, and with the hotline that has appeared to be effective. And so I will suggest that we have made great progress on everyone's contribution towards this. Any additional comments on this subject before we move on? And seeing none, is there anything that anyone would like to bring up under new business in a request for to have on a future agenda and or our staff to research for to come back with information that we have not discussed? And I'll go to Jennifer, please.
Yeah, and it just, I don't have our, whatever it's called, our why we're here and what we're doing kind of intent.
Terms of reference?
Yes, I do not have that in front of me. But something somebody said made me think of it. Okay, so we're going to do our best and hopefully we get it right, but we'll check back in a year or two and say, okay, we kind of think this needs to be tweaked. I'm not really sure that this, I would be more comfortable if the people reviewing it in a year or two were the same people who did it in the first place, as opposed to saying to the next council, hey, is it working? And all of us might not be there, right? And so the new ones are like, well, I don't know, what did they say? What were they going to try? Like maybe instead of disbanding after a year, we, and I'm not sure if it's in the terms of reference, if the clerk could look that up, or if anyone even thinks about it, like, should we meet again after a year and review it with data and say, did we get it right? Or should we make suggestions?
It's a really good comment. I'll suggest for the parking lot for the clerk. Do you have a response at this time, please, clerk?
The only thing is that the terms of reference do specify this is for 1 year. Once the bylaw is presented to council, this committee is technically finished at the will of council. To that end, if the bylaw that you end up, for preparing and recommending to council for approval, if it holds an appeals committee as opposed to necessarily, that may be this committee, depending on the interest of those who are still on it. So I think there's opportunity for movement, and that appeals committee may be the one, maybe just be called the short-term rental committee moving forward, and maybe they are the ones who review. So for the purpose of today, this committee still is just dealing with the recommendation coming to council. But that recommendation could include that there be a thorough review from those members who, as much as they want to, you don't have to, as much as you want to come back and review. So.
Good comment, Jennifer. It's really good. Yeah. Any other additional comments from any committee members on new business that we would like our staff to bring back as far as reporting back that we have not already discussed tonight? And if not, thank you very much to everyone's input. And this has not been, it's a little bit like finding a needle in a haystack. And I really appreciate everyone's input on coming up with suggestions. And that's why we established the committee with these astute individuals. So with that, our next meeting is the 25th of February at 7 p.m. or at the call of the chair, Jennifer. And I hope it suits everyone that we were able to meet virtually this evening. And I've said many times, one of the benefits of COVID, we all understand and remember the drawbacks. One of the benefits is it forced us to do things differently. And we would not have had this virtual meeting 5 years ago. And with the weather conditions that we've experienced of late, thank you very much to our staff for organizing this virtual meeting for us tonight. And we'll see what the weather is like on the 25th of February. Additional comments of anyone before we would entertain a motion to adjourn? And I don't see any, so mover and a seconder to adjourn, if you would please. Mr. Thomas and Mr. Montgomery, that the short-term rental committee does now adjourn to meet again on the 25th of February, 2025 at 7 p.m. at the call of the chair. All in favor of this motion?
Aye.
Hey,
Thank
that's carried. Awesome. Thanks very much to all.
Thanks,
and,
everyone.
stay
Thanks,
well.
everybody. Have a good night.
Yep.
Take care. Bye.